I never imagined becoming one of those people, the kind who sits in a dimly lit room and swears with a tremor in their voice that they encountered a Sasquatch in the wilderness. Yet here I sit in my cramped studio apartment, the city's indifferent hum a constant backdrop, staring at a cup of reheated tea that has once again gone cold. I'm attempting to articulate something that fundamentally fractured and then rebuilt my understanding of reality. I'm 53 years old now, and in the 4 years since my wife Eleanor was taken from me by cancer, the mountains have become my only true refuge. They are the singular place where the crushing, atmospheric pressure of loneliness doesn't completely suffocate the air from my lungs. Eleanor and I used to explore these rugged trails together every chance we could steal from our workaday lives. We would sometimes camp for entire weekends, content just to be enveloped by the cathedral silence of the towering pines and the stoic presence of ancient rock formations. She had a way of seeing things I missed, the delicate fretwork of a spider's web beaded with morning dew, the specific shade of purple in a cluster of wild lupine, the way the light would catch the granite peaks at dusk and set them ablaze. After she died, I kept returning to those same peaks and valleys, a desperate pilgrim searching for some trace of her presence, some lingering echo of the life we had so carefully and joyfully built together. What I discovered instead was something else entirely, something that defied every rational explanation I had ever relied upon, something that proved to me beyond any shadow of a doubt that we exist within a world far stranger and more populated than most people ever allow themselves to realize. It began simply enough, just another Sunday morning trek through the dense wilderness, approximately 35 miles from the sterile quiet of my apartment. The trail system wasn't heavily trafficked, which appealed to my raw, grieving soul. I craved isolation, or at least I had convinced myself that solitude was the necessary prescription for the ache in my chest during those dark, hollow months. The spring wildflowers were just beginning to assert themselves along the path, shy white trilliums and bold strokes of Indian paintbrush. The cool mountain air, crisp and clean, carried the scent of snowmelt and the sharp, resinous perfume of fresh cedar. I'd been hiking for roughly 90 minutes, my boots crunching a steady rhythm on the gravelly path, when I first experienced that peculiar primal sensation crawling up the back of my neck. That unmistakable instinct that tells you, in no uncertain terms, that you are being observed. I froze mid-stride, my hand hovering over my water bottle. I scanned my surroundings with painstaking care, my eyes tracing the dense undergrowth, the shadowed spaces between the enormous Douglas firs, the jumble of moss-covered boulders. I detected nothing unusual. Nothing aside from the ordinary bustling lives of chipmunks and the throaty commentary of ravens conducting their daily routines. I dismissed the feeling as a symptom of my grief, a form of paranoia born from loneliness, and continued my upward ascent along the rocky trail. But that unnerving awareness of being watched never fully dissipated. Throughout the following several weeks, each time I ventured into these mountains, I would experience that identical sensation, the feeling of invisible, intelligent eyes tracking my every movement through the wilderness. Initially, my logical mind scrambled for plausible explanations. Perhaps it was a mountain lion, silent and patient, assessing me as potential prey. Or maybe an opportunistic black bear, curious about the contents of my pack. But the intensity of the observation felt different, more focused and undeniably intentional. Whatever lurked out there in the deep woods wasn't merely passing through its territory and noting my presence. It felt as though it were deliberately following me, studying me with a purpose I couldn't begin to fathom. I began to test my theory, paying much closer attention to my surroundings. I would stop abruptly and spin around, hoping to catch a flicker of movement. I started taking alternate, less traveled routes to determine whether the sensation would vanish. It never did. The feeling was a constant, a silent companion on my lonely hikes. Then one morning in early June, when the air was thick with the scent of pine and warming earth, I finally glimpsed it. I had paused to catch my breath near a massive granite outcropping that overlooked the valley, a favorite spot of Eleanor's. It was then that I detected movement in my peripheral vision, something large and dark, rapidly ducking behind a towering Douglas fir approximately 40 feet upslope from where I stood. The movement possessed too much speed and deliberation to be any normal animal I was familiar with. It wasn't the lumbering gait of a bear or the fluid grace of a cougar. It was something else. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I slowly rotated my head, pretending I hadn't registered anything unusual, keeping my gaze fixed on the distant peaks. When I casually glanced back several seconds later, feigning interest in a particular bird call, I saw it distinctly. It was a compact, dark figure, peering around the enormous trunk, observing me with an unmistakable, almost unnerving curiosity. The Sasquatch was small. I could determine that much immediately, and the fact struck me as profoundly strange, a direct contradiction to every sensationalized depiction I had ever seen. It stood perhaps 5 feet 8 inches tall, covered from head to toe in thick, somewhat matted reddish-brown fur. Its face, framed by the coarse hair, displayed a remarkable and unsettling expressiveness, with deep-set, penetrating eyes that radiated an almost human quality of intelligence and profound awareness. The creature wasn't the hulking, monstrous beast described in lurid documentaries and whispered campfire tales. This one seemed closer to my own stature, more slender and athletic in its build. When our gazes connected directly, a jolt went through me, a shock of pure, unadulterated recognition. The Sasquatch immediately withdrew behind the tree, and I heard the soft rustling of foliage as it retreated deeper into the forest. I remained absolutely motionless for several long minutes, my forgotten water bottle clutched in a trembling hand. My analytical mind, my constant companion and defense mechanism, went into overdrive, desperately attempting to rationalize what I had just witnessed. Perhaps it was some eccentric local, a hermit, wearing an elaborate costume for reasons of his own. Perhaps I was finally experiencing hallucinations, my mind cracking under the sustained pressure of grief. Perhaps my loneliness had finally pushed me beyond the fragile edge of sanity. But somewhere deep in my gut, in that intuitive place that bypasses logic, I understood exactly what I had seen. That brief, heart-stopping glimpse had been sufficient to recognize that whatever hid behind that tree wasn't human, wasn't a bear, wasn't anything I could conveniently dismiss or explain away. A Sasquatch had been real and tangible, and it had been watching me with an undeniable and seemingly harmless interest. That night, sleep was an impossibility. I lay awake until the first grey light of dawn crept through my apartment window, my mind churning with unanswerable questions and impossible scenarios. Should I report this to someone official? The Park Service? The sheriff? The absurdity of the thought made me laugh out loud in the quiet room. Who would possibly believe my account? They would think I was drunk or crazy or both. Should I return to those mountains? Or should I find completely different hiking locations, places where I could be certain I was truly alone? Part of me was genuinely terrified, a primal fear of the unknown echoing in my bones. But another part, a part I couldn't fully comprehend yet, felt an intense, magnetic curiosity. The Sasquatch hadn't displayed any aggression or threatening behavior. If anything, it had appeared timid, almost as curious about me as I now was about it. When Sunday morning arrived again, I found myself on autopilot, driving back to that identical trailhead, completely unable to resist the pull of that mysterious, life-altering encounter. For the first 90 minutes of my hike, everything appeared perfectly, almost disappointingly, normal. I walked the familiar switchbacks and ridgelines, the sounds of birdsong and the strengthening June sunshine warming my shoulders, providing a comforting sense of routine. I had nearly convinced myself that I had somehow imagined the entire incident, that it had been a waking dream born of sorrow when I heard a single, sharp crack of a branch somewhere behind me. I turned slowly, my heart leaping into my throat, and there it stood. The Sasquatch was positioned roughly 25 feet away, partially concealed behind a dense cluster of mountain laurel bushes. This time, it didn't flee. We stared at each other for what seemed like an eternity, an entire epoch contained in a few silent minutes. Neither of us moved, both carefully assessing the unprecedented situation. The Sasquatch took one tentative, deliberate step in my direction, and I instinctively took a reflexive step backward. It halted immediately, its movement ceasing as if I had flipped a switch. And I could have sworn in that moment that I detected something resembling disappointment flicker across its expressive, strangely human-like features. We remained frozen in this strange, silent standoff for several long minutes, and then, to my absolute, world-shattering astonishment, the Sasquatch opened its mouth and vocalized. The word that emerged was rough and labored, like the sound of someone struggling to master a foreign language they had only ever heard, but it was completely and utterly unmistakable. The Sasquatch said, "Hello?" My legs nearly collapsed beneath me. I grasped a nearby sapling for support, its slender trunk trembling along with my hand. My heart was pounding so violently against my ribs I thought it might actually explode from my rib cage. The Sasquatch had spoken to me, in English. It had actually formed a recognizable word and addressed me directly, as if we were two strangers passing on a city street. I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound emerged, only a dry, useless croak. I attempted again, my voice shaking so severely I barely recognized it as my own. I managed to whisper hoarsely, How is this possible? How can you speak?" The Sasquatch took another small step closer, its movements careful and measured, the way one might approach a frightened, cornered animal. When it spoke again, the words came slowly, separated by lengthy pauses, as it seemed to search for the correct sounds, assembling them with great effort. The Sasquatch said, "Listen, you, many seasons." Its voice possessed a deeper, more resonant quality than I would have anticipated, with an unusual timbre that seemed to originate from somewhere profound within its chest. The Sasquatch gestured vaguely toward the surrounding wilderness, then tapped the side of its head with one long, furred finger. I struggled desperately to process the implications of what was occurring. The Sasquatch was informing me that it had learned human speech by listening to people, by observing hikers and campers like me over extended, unimaginable periods of time. But how long had it been listening? How many years, how many decades had this being spent in the silent solitude of these mountains, silently observing, absorbing our language, studying our behaviors? As if sensing my bewildered confusion, the Sasquatch vocalized again, tapping its own chest this time. It said, "Not young, small body, old spirit." The Sasquatch gestured to itself, then spread its long arms wide, indicating something much larger and more imposing, before bringing them back to reference its own compact frame. Understanding gradually crystallized in my consciousness, a dawn breaking over a landscape I had never known existed. This Sasquatch wasn't young at all, despite its smaller stature. It was diminutive for its species, perhaps, but it had existed for an extraordinarily long time. This creature had witnessed these mountains transform through decades, or possibly even centuries. It had observed countless humans passing through its territory, had absorbed our language piece by painful piece over an incomprehensible span of time. The Sasquatch took another step forward, and this time I didn't retreat. Something in its deep, intelligent eyes, in the gentle, non-threatening way it carried itself, communicated with absolute clarity that I had nothing to fear from this being. That first genuine encounter lasted perhaps 30 minutes, though time seemed to have lost all meaning. We didn't exchange many words. The Sasquatch's vocabulary was severely limited, a collection of nouns and simple verbs, and I remained too profoundly shocked to formulate many coherent sentences myself. But something profound and unspoken passed between us during that time. Some mutual recognition that neither of us was quite as isolated in our existence as we had previously believed. When the Sasquatch finally turned to depart, disappearing back into the dense forest with a surprising grace and silence that belied its solid form, I felt a strange and unexpected sense of loss wash over me. I had discovered something precious and completely impossible, and I was not prepared to release it. I returned the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. Each time the Sasquatch would materialize at some point during my hike, always cautious initially, always observing me carefully from a distance to verify that I was alone before approaching closer. Our meetings developed a kind of natural, unspoken rhythm. I would hike upward along the familiar trails, the Sasquatch would follow at a respectful distance, and eventually we would stop somewhere peaceful, a sun-dappled clearing, a mossy bank beside a stream, and simply exist together for a while. The Sasquatch gradually became more comfortable vocalizing, slowly and painstakingly incorporating new words into its limited vocabulary, though it never quite managed to string together complete, grammatically correct sentences. One afternoon in late June, as we rested on a fallen log overlooking a pristine alpine meadow vibrant with wildflowers, the Sasquatch reached out and gently touched the back of my hand with its own. The contact startled me initially. The skin of its palm was tough and calloused, yet the creature's touch was surprisingly gentle, almost tender. It pointed to me, then to itself, then made a sweeping gesture that seemed to encompass the entire forest around us. The Sasquatch said, "All one. All connected." It was attempting to communicate something profound, something about the fundamental interconnectedness of all living things, a concept my own culture often forgets. Over the following months, these Sunday encounters became the focal point of my entire existence. I lived for those mornings when I could escape the grey confines of the city and spend time with my extraordinary friend. Because that's what the Sasquatch had become, a friend, perhaps the most genuine and uncomplicated friend I had ever known. The creature never judged me, never demanded anything from me, never made me feel inadequate or broken. It simply accepted me exactly as I was, a grieving, middle-aged man trying desperately to find some sliver of meaning in a world that had become almost unbearably empty. The Sasquatch taught me things during those months together. Profound lessons I don't think I could have learned any other way. It showed me how to truly observe the forest, not just walk blindly through it as I had done for years. It taught me to recognize the subtle signs of animal passage, the specific way deer create trails through the undergrowth, the territorial claw marks bears leave on certain trees, the intricate language of danger and alarm that birds communicate through their calls. The Sasquatch demonstrated how to move with silence and grace through the wilderness, how to place my feet carefully to avoid snapping branches, how to use the direction of the wind to mask my scent, how to become a part of the landscape rather than an intruder within it. But more importantly, the Sasquatch taught me about patience and the power of presence. In our modern world, we are constantly rushing, constantly multitasking, our minds perpetually churning with thoughts about the past or anxieties about the future, rarely ever fully present in the actual moment we are living. The Sasquatch existed entirely in the present. It didn't seem to carry regrets about yesterday or harbor anxieties about tomorrow. It was simply here now, fully engaged with whatever was happening in this exact moment. I remember one particular afternoon, when we were sitting beside a small, gurgling creek, watching the clear water flow over smooth, time-worn stones. I was lost in my own thoughts, a familiar spiral of grief, thinking about Eleanor, about all the things I should have said or done differently, all the precious moments I had wasted being distracted or preoccupied with trivialities. The Sasquatch reached over and placed its large, warm hand on my shoulder, a simple physical anchor that pulled me back from the maelstrom of my memories and into the present moment. It pointed to the creek and said, "Water moves, not stops, you same." And the creature was telling me, in its beautifully simple way, that I needed to keep moving forward like the water in the creek. Water doesn't stop flowing because it encounters obstacles like rocks or fallen logs. It simply finds a way around them and continues on its journey. I was holding onto my grief like a massive boulder, letting it block the natural, forward flow of my life. The Sasquatch was gently, wisely suggesting that I needed to let that grief flow through me and eventually past me, rather than damming it up inside where it would stagnate and poison everything. This was difficult wisdom to accept, but I understood the profound truth in it. Another profound lesson came when the Sasquatch showed me how it gathered food. I had always assumed, based on folklore, that these creatures were primarily hunters, aggressive predators taking down elk and deer. But the Sasquatch I knew was largely a forager, gathering a wide variety of berries, nuts, roots, and various edible plants. It moved through the forest with an encyclopedic, innate knowledge, knowing exactly which plants were edible, which possessed medicinal properties, and which should be avoided entirely. One afternoon, the Sasquatch showed me a particular root that, when chewed, could ease stomach pain. Another time, it pointed out a specific type of moss that could be used as a natural bandage to stop bleeding. The creature possessed more practical, life-sustaining knowledge about wilderness survival than any human expert I had ever encountered. But what struck me most profoundly was the manner in which the Sasquatch harvested these resources. It never took more than it needed. If it found a huckleberry bush heavy with ripe fruit, it would take only a small portion, leaving plenty for other animals and ensuring the plant could continue to produce and thrive. If it dug up edible roots, it would carefully replant a portion of the tuber to ensure future growth. The Sasquatch lived in a state of perfect, sustainable balance with its environment, taking only what it required while simultaneously ensuring the forest's ongoing health and abundance. This was such a stark, painful contrast to how we humans typically interact with nature, taking everything we can, depleting resources without a single thought for tomorrow or for the other species that depend on those same resources. The Sasquatch's way of living demonstrated a profound, inherent respect for the natural world, a deep understanding that we are not separate from nature, but are deeply, inextricably embedded within it, entirely dependent on its health for our own survival. I also learned a little about the Sasquatch's social nature, or rather, its apparent lack of constant social contact. The creature seemed to live primarily in solitude, though it hinted at others of its kind existing in the vast, sprawling wilderness. It used a word that sounded like kin when referring to other Sasquatch, suggesting it was aware of their presence, even if it didn't interact with them on a regular basis. The Sasquatch explained, as best as it could with its limited vocabulary, that its kind valued independence and solitude, coming together only occasionally for specific important purposes. This resonated deeply with me, as I had always been somewhat introverted myself, preferring a few deep, meaningful connections with individuals rather than a wide net of superficial relationships. The Sasquatch seemed to have chosen me deliberately, not randomly. Out of all the hikers who passed through these mountains, it had selected me to observe, to approach, and ultimately, to befriend. I often wondered why. What had it seen in me that made it take such an enormous risk, The Sasquatch couldn't explain this in words, but over time I came to believe that it had recognized something in me. A similar loneliness, perhaps, a kindred spirit seeking connection in the most unexpected of places. As summer progressed into the golden light of early autumn, our friendship deepened considerably. We developed a kind of communication that transcended words, a mutual understanding built on patient observation and shared intuition. I learned to read the Sasquatch's subtle body language, to understand what its various grunts, huffs, and gestures meant. Similarly, it became remarkably adept at reading my emotional state, seeming to sense when I was struggling with a fresh wave of grief or when I simply needed the comfort of silent companionship. One particularly memorable encounter occurred in late September. I had been having an especially difficult week, the anniversary of Eleanor's death looming on the calendar and stirring up all the raw pain I thought I had begun to process. I hiked into the mountains that Sunday, feeling absolutely wretched, tears streaming down my face as I walked the familiar trail. The Sasquatch appeared earlier than usual, stepping directly onto the path in front of me, rather than observing from a distance first, as was its custom. It looked at me for a long moment, those penetrating ancient eyes seeming to see directly into the fractured core of my soul. Then, without a word, it stepped forward and wrapped its long, powerful arms around me in what I can only describe as a hug. I broke down completely, sobbing against the Sasquatch's furry chest while it held me firmly but gently, making soft, rumbling sounds deep in its throat that were somehow incredibly, profoundly comforting. We stood like that for I don't know how long, this impossible, mythical creature offering solace to a broken man in the middle of the wilderness. When I finally regained some semblance of composure, the Sasquatch released me and gently, almost clumsily, wiped the tears from my face with its rough fingers. It said, "She, here, always, here." The creature placed one hand over my heart, then swept its other arm wide to encompass the forest, the mountains, the sky around us. The Sasquatch was telling me that Eleanor wasn't truly gone, that her energy, her essence, was still present in the world around me, in the trees and mountains we had loved together, and most importantly, in my heart and memories. This simple, profound statement brought me more genuine comfort than months of well-meaning but inadequate condolences from friends and family ever had. The Sasquatch understood grief in a way that transcended words, and its simple, powerful gesture of compassion meant everything to me. As autumn deepened and the aspen leaves turned a brilliant, shimmering gold, I began bringing small offerings on my hikes. Nothing elaborate or expensive, just things I thought the Sasquatch might enjoy or find interesting. I brought a small, cheap hand mirror, which fascinated the creature endlessly. It spent nearly an hour examining its own reflection, making different facial expressions, and watching with childlike wonder how its face changed. I brought a harmonica, and though the Sasquatch couldn't quite figure out how to play it properly, it seemed to enjoy the strange, reedy sounds it could produce by blowing into it. I brought various snacks, curious to see what foods the creature might like beyond its normal forest diet. The Sasquatch seemed especially intrigued by dried mango, which it chewed thoughtfully before making a low, approving sound. But its absolute favorite, by a wide margin, was peanut butter. The first time I offered it a spoonful on a piece of bark, the Sasquatch's eyes widened with what I can only describe as pure, unadulterated delight. It savored that peanut butter as if it were the finest delicacy imaginable, and from that point forward, I always made sure to bring a jar along on my hikes. Watching the Sasquatch enjoy peanut butter became one of my simple, profound pleasures. A small reminder that joy can be found in the smallest, most unexpected things. The creature also began bringing me gifts in return. Though these were very different from my manufactured offerings, the Sasquatch would present me with interesting, uniquely shaped stones, iridescent feathers from rare birds, pieces of weathered wood with unusual shapes or grain patterns. Each gift was given with obvious care and intention, the Sasquatch watching my reaction closely to ensure that I appreciated what it was offering. I treasured these simple gifts more than anything I owned. They weren't valuable in any monetary sense, but they represented something far more precious, the friendship and trust of a being that most of humanity refused to believe even existed. I kept these items in a small wooden box in my apartment, and sometimes, when I was feeling particularly disconnected from the world, I would take them out and hold them, remembering the quiet, sacred moments when each was given. One particularly significant gift came in early October. The Sasquatch led me to a secluded spot deep in the forest, farther from the main trails than we had ever ventured before. There, growing in a small, damp clearing, was a cluster of unusual mushrooms that glowed faintly with a soft, ethereal bioluminescence. The Sasquatch carefully harvested one and handed it to me, its strange light pulsing gently in my palm. It said, "Light in dark, like you." I understood the metaphor immediately. The creature was telling me that I, in my own way, brought light into its dark, solitary existence, that my presence and friendship illuminated its long life in the same way these mushrooms illuminated the dark forest floor. I was deeply moved by this gesture, by the profound sentiment expressed through such simple words and actions. I carefully preserved that mushroom, drying it and keeping it in my box of treasures alongside the stones and feathers. The Sasquatch also showed me its dwelling place during those autumn months, an enormous privilege that I fully recognized and honored. The creature led me to a remote, hidden area where massive boulders had tumbled together centuries ago to form a natural, protected cave. Inside this shelter, the ground was covered with a thick, soft bedding of dried plant material and animal furs, creating a surprisingly comfortable and insulated resting place. The walls of the cave were decorated with what appeared to be deliberate arrangements of colorful stones, bundles of bird feathers tied with vine, and pieces of bark displaying interesting natural patterns. The Sasquatch had clearly collected these items because they pleased its aesthetic sense, clear evidence of an artistic sensibility I would never have expected. The creature watched me examine its home with a mixture of obvious vulnerability and pride. This was where it spent its nights, where it rested and dreamed, where it was most defenseless. By revealing this place to me, the Sasquatch was demonstrating a level of absolute, unconditional trust that humbled me. It said, "My place. You come, if need." The creature was offering me sanctuary, telling me that if I ever required shelter or safety in the wilderness, I could come to this location and it would be there for me. I was profoundly moved by this offering. Throughout all our months of friendship, the Sasquatch had never asked anything of me. It had only given, teaching me, protecting me when I unknowingly wandered into dangerous areas, sharing its ancient wisdom and quiet companionship. And now it was giving me even more, opening up the most private part of its existence to me. I thanked the creature as best I could with my inadequate human words, trying to convey how much its trust and friendship meant to me, how it had quite literally saved my life by giving me a reason to keep going during my darkest, most hopeless period. As October progressed into the grey chill of November, I began to sense a subtle change in the Sasquatch's demeanor. It seemed more contemplative, more withdrawn, though still friendly and affectionate toward me. Sometimes I would catch it staring off into the distance, toward the snow-capped peaks on the horizon, with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Something between sadness and a deep, inexorable longing. I asked if something was wrong, but the creature struggled to explain, lacking the vocabulary to express whatever complex emotion it was feeling. Then, one grey November morning, as we sat together on a high ridge, watching fog roll through the valley below, the Sasquatch finally managed to communicate what had been troubling it. It pointed to itself, then made a sweeping gesture toward the distant mountains, much farther than I had ever ventured. It said, "Must go. Time come." My heart sank into my stomach like a stone. The creature was telling me it needed to leave, that it was time for it to move on to somewhere else. I wanted to ask why, wanted to beg it to stay, but I understood somehow that this departure was necessary, inevitable, a part of its life cycle that I couldn't change. The Sasquatch had its own life, its own rhythms and requirements that I couldn't fully comprehend. I asked when it would leave, my voice thick with a sorrow I couldn't hide, dreading the answer. The creature held up both of its large hands, opening and closing them several times. I interpreted this as meaning several days, perhaps a week or two. The Sasquatch wanted to spend a bit more time with me before departing, wanted to say goodbye properly rather than simply vanishing into the forest one day. Over those final days together, every moment felt precious and painfully bittersweet. We revisited our favorite spots, the alpine meadow where we had first truly connected, the creek where the Sasquatch had taught me about letting grief flow, the rocky outcropping where I had first glimpsed the creature all those months ago. Each location was now imbued with memories, tangible reminders of the extraordinary, impossible friendship we had formed. The Sasquatch seemed determined to share as much knowledge as possible in our remaining time together, as if trying to pack in all the lessons it hadn't yet had time to teach me. It showed me how to predict weather changes by observing cloud formations and subtle shifts in animal behavior. It demonstrated how to find water even in apparently dry areas by watching where certain birds flew in the early morning. It taught me which stars to follow for navigation if I ever became lost at night. All of this practical knowledge was valuable, but what I treasured most was simply spending time in the creature's presence, absorbing its calm strength and gentle, ancient wisdom. One afternoon, the Sasquatch did something it had never done before. It attempted to teach me its own language, or at least a small portion of it. The creature made a series of low, resonant, guttural sounds, then pointed to a tree. It repeated the sounds patiently until I attempted to mimic them, which apparently amused the Sasquatch greatly, as it made its soft, huffing laughter sound at my clumsy, inadequate efforts. But it patiently corrected my pronunciation until I could produce something that approximated the correct sound. The Sasquatch then taught me its sounds for water, stone, sky, and several other basic elements of its world. I practiced these diligently, wanting to have some small piece of the creature's world that I could carry with me after it was gone. On what I somehow knew would be our final day together, the Sasquatch led me to a high, wind-swept ridge overlooking a vast, unbroken wilderness stretching to the far horizon. We sat side by side as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in brilliant, heartbreaking strokes of orange and purple. The creature was quiet for a long time, and I didn't disturb the sacred silence, understanding that it was processing the upcoming separation in its own way. Finally, as twilight deepened and the first stars began to appear, the Sasquatch turned to me and spoke more words at once than I had ever heard it string together. It said, with great effort, "You teach me, too. Alone, long time. You show, friend, possible. Different, not matter." I realized with a sudden, profound start that our friendship had been just as meaningful and transformative for the Sasquatch as it had been for me. The creature had been alone for decades, perhaps centuries, observing humans from a distance but never daring to connect with them. I had shown it that true friendship could transcend the seemingly insurmountable boundaries of species, that our differences didn't matter when genuine affection and mutual respect were present. The Sasquatch reached into a small pouch it sometimes carried, a pouch woven from plant fibers, and pulled out a smooth, heavy stone unlike any I had ever seen before. It was a deep, dark green with shimmering veins of gold running through it, almost certainly some rare mineral specimen. The creature pressed this stone into my palm and closed my fingers around it. It said, "Carry me, I carry you, always." The Sasquatch was telling me that even though we were separating physically, we would carry each other in our hearts and memories forever. The bond we had formed was permanent, unbreakable by distance or time. I pulled out something I had brought specifically for this moment, a faded photograph of Eleanor and me, taken on one of our happiest days together, hiking in these very mountains. I had been carrying it in my wallet throughout all our encounters, but had never shown it to the Sasquatch before. I handed it to the creature and explained as best I could who she was, how much I had loved her, how her death had shattered me, and how the Sasquatch's friendship had helped me begin to heal. The creature studied the photograph carefully for a long time, its intelligent eyes moving between our smiling faces. Then it looked at me with such profound understanding and compassion that I felt tears welling up in my eyes again. It carefully folded the photograph and tucked it into its pouch, then placed both of its large hands on my shoulders. The Sasquatch said, "She, proud, you, strong, you, good." Those simple words, that straightforward, unqualified affirmation from this impossible being, touched me more deeply than I can possibly express. The Sasquatch believed I was strong and good, despite all my flaws and failures. It believed my wife would be proud of how I had survived her loss and slowly, painfully rebuilt my life. Coming from this creature, this validation felt completely genuine and deeply, profoundly meaningful. We stayed on that ridge until full darkness fell, the Milky Way a brilliant slash across the black velvet sky, neither of us wanting to let go of these final, precious moments together. Eventually, the Sasquatch stood and helped me to my feet. It embraced me one last time, that same comforting, solid hug it had given me months earlier when I'd been breaking down on the trail. I held onto the creature tightly, trying to memorize the feel of its coarse fur, the sound of its steady breathing, the earthy forest scent that always surrounded it. When we finally separated, the Sasquatch placed one hand over my heart, then over its own heart, then pointed up to the stars above us. It was telling me that we would remain connected through that same universal, mysterious force that connects all living things, that invisible web of consciousness and energy that flows through everything. The creature turned and began walking toward the dark forest, pausing once to look back at me. I raised my hand in a final farewell, and the Sasquatch mirrored the gesture. Then it disappeared into the shadows, moving with that characteristic impossible grace and silence, leaving me alone on the ridge under the silent watching stars. I stood there for a long time after it had vanished, clutching the cool, smooth green stone it had given me, feeling the immense weight of that final goodbye settling into my bones. The walk back down the mountain to the trailhead seemed impossibly long and lonely, every shadow and rustle of leaves making me hope irrationally that the Sasquatch had changed its mind and come back. But deep down, I knew it was truly gone, embarked on whatever ancient journey or purpose had called it away from these mountains. In the weeks and months that followed, I continued hiking those same trails every Sunday, partly out of a faint, lingering hope that I might encounter the Sasquatch again, but mostly because the mountains had become essential to my well-being, my church, my sanctuary. I never saw the creature again, but sometimes I would find small, inexplicable signs that made me wonder if it was somehow checking on me from a distance. An unusual, beautifully colored stone placed on a fallen log where I frequently rested. A pattern of broken branches that seemed too deliberately arranged to be natural. a patch of rare edible mushrooms that hadn't been there the day before. I couldn't be certain that these were messages from my friend, but I chose to believe they were, that the Sasquatch was letting me know that it remembered me and was watching over me even from far away. I never told anyone about my experiences. Who would believe such a story? Most people would dismiss me as delusional, a grieving man who had lost his mind. A few might believe, but they would want me to lead them to the Sasquatch, to prove its existence, perhaps to capture or study it. I could not and would not ever betray my friend in that way. The Sasquatch had trusted me with something infinitely precious, its existence and its friendship, and I would guard that trust for the rest of my life. Instead, I carry these memories and lessons silently within me, letting them shape how I live my life. I try to move through the world with the same quiet grace and keen awareness the Sasquatch demonstrated. I attempt to live in better balance with nature, taking only what I need, respecting all living things, recognizing my place within the larger, intricate web of existence. I practice being more present in each moment, rather than constantly dwelling in past regrets or future anxieties. These lessons have transformed me in ways I am still discovering, made me into a better, more whole version of myself than I was before. I think about specific moments from our time together constantly, each one a precious jewel that I revisit in my mind. I remember the first time the Sasquatch spoke to me, that rough, hesitant hello that shattered my entire understanding of what was possible in this world. I remember the afternoon it showed me its dwelling place, trusting me with its most vulnerable space. I remember watching it laugh, that pure, unself-conscious huffing sound after it slipped and fell into a stream. I remember the way it comforted me when I was drowning in grief, holding me without judgment while I fell apart. I remember our last evening together on that high ridge, watching the sunset and saying goodbye to the most extraordinary and unlikely friend I have ever known. That green stone the Sasquatch gave me sits on my desk where I can see it every day. Sometimes when I'm feeling disconnected or overwhelmed by the noise and rush of the modern world, I hold that stone in my hand and remember the quiet companionship of sitting together beside the creek, not needing words, because our understanding transcended language. The stone is just a stone, a mineral specimen with no monetary value, but it represents something far more precious. It is proof that our encounters were real, that the connection we formed was genuine, that magic and wonder still exist in this world if we only remain open enough to discovering them. Years have passed since that farewell evening on the ridge. My life has changed in countless ways since those transformative months with the creature. I left my stressful corporate job and found work that allows me more time in nature, even if it pays less. I simplified my lifestyle, discovering I need far fewer possessions and distractions than I once thought. The mountains wait, as they always do, full of mysteries and teachings I have yet to discover. The Sasquatch may be gone from these particular peaks, but its presence lingers for me in every tree and stone and stream. I am ready for whatever comes next, secure in the knowledge that I am part of something vast and beautiful and eternal. The creature taught me this truth, and I will never forget. The man I am now has been rebuilt from better materials, shaped by a wisdom far older and deeper than human civilization. Eleanor would be proud, I think. As I pull on my worn boots this Sunday morning, I feel a deep and abiding contentment. The wilderness calls, as it always does, and I answer that call gladly, ready to see what lessons today might bring.